For this example, we're going to start from the test that we prepared that executes the stored procedure to get the student count. Now, we have a number of states that we want to test, and we want to make sure that the stored procedure is operating correctly with each of these states. So we want to turn this into a data-driven test. And basically what a data-driven test allows us to do is provide a source of input, multiple values, and the test will be executed once for each row for the incoming data, and we can use the values that are in those rows as parameters to the test. So this lets us set up our test logic once and then execute it many times over and over to cover different combinations and permutations of the data that we're interested in. So what I've done to enable this is I've taken the existing test and I've gone to the data-driven source and checked enable data-driven testing for this test. I need to give it a connection, and we're going to use the higher ed connection. This can be sourced from any ADO.NET compatible data source, as well as from REST or any of the other available data connections. In this case, rather than actually pulling the data, I'm actually live from the database, I'm actually going to use a select statement that just effectively hard codes the values in. In this case, I know what my expected values are as seen in this select statement for each of the states, and I've also included a bad value in the form of Florida, which I have twice. 375 is the correct value, 400 is the bad value, and I'll use this to show you what a failure in the data-driven test actually looks like. So just to verify everything's good here, I can execute that, and down here we can see the values that are coming back are state and expected student count. Now these column headers become available resources that we can use within our test. And again, the test will be executed once for each row in here, so in this case it's going to execute 5 times, and we want to update the test to actually use these values so that the test is parameterized and changes for each row that is being executed. So the first thing we want to do is go back to our student count procedure, and we want to take this hard-coded value New York, and we want to make this data-driven. So I can modify this by using a curly brace, the name of the resource key, which is state. It matches the column name from the data-driven source that we looked at a couple of steps ago, and then closing curly braces. Anywhere where I use this syntax, this will be replaced dynamically at runtime within the queries, within other places within LegiTest. Now the other thing that I want to do, so I've got the stored procedure being executed with a variety of states now, but I also need to change the assertion because I don't want to compare every state to the static value 433. I want to make it dynamic. So I'm going to change the comparable value source from a static value to a resource. And I'm going to pick a resource key for it. And you can see expected student count and state. Both of these in the text here, you can see they're coming from the data-driven test. So state we've already used via the parameterization syntax. Here we're going to pick expected student count to use as a resource. And that is now set up. So we should be able to save our test, make sure that's all done, build our solution. And now we're going to run our test, and remember this time we expect to see a failure because of the Florida value that's in there. So we do see a failure. Now if I click on this and we look at the details here, we do see the expected value is 400. The actual value is actually 375, which is correct. We provided a bad expected value. If I want to see more detail, I can click Output, and I can actually see exactly what test case parameters were passed in. The state was Florida, expected student count was 400. If I go back to this, I can also see the other variations of the test for the different data rows. And if I want details on the parameter that was used for that row, I can actually click output again and see that the actual values passed in for each column. So that's very handy troubleshooting this. If you're using in-unit, the results will show up slightly differently. When you look at the Test Explorer, you'll actually see multiple instances of test 1 followed by the parameters that were passed into it. That's just a difference between the two harnesses. It doesn't really expect your results. So if I'd like to clean this up and make sure that I'm actually getting the correct results, I just need to comment out that last statement, test this to make sure it's correct. And now I can go back to the Test Explorer. I can click Run All. This is automatically going to build the project for me when I do this. And this time we got our 4 rows and everything was correct, so the test passed.